Last time I checked, boss fights were supposed to be scary. At the very least, shouldn't they be terrifying? I know maybe not every game calls for scary boss fights, and there might be a few complaints if a kid's game had any deliberately distressing content in it, like gore or excessive violence, but boss fights are incredibly important within the framework of the average video game. You shouldn't fear coming up against a powerful opponent, but it should at least give you a bit of pause or hesitation over whether or not you can defeat it. This is why scary boss fights are so effective, since there's always gonna be that fear of the unknown that you'd get from fighting any new foe, but now it's coupled with the more obvious fear of, oh no, it's an actual nightmare. So that's psychological fear working with tangible aesthetical fear? Damn, we're going deep this year, aren't we? I have many fears. I've been scared of spiders for as long as I can remember. I've never been all that keen on heights, and there's always been this nagging fear in the back of my mind that my current bulky wallet just isn't good enough, and what I really need is a discreet front pocket watch, and in which case, it's very lucky that this video is sponsored by Ridge, and that they're giving me such a lovely treat. You know, if you get attacked over this Halloween by a chainsaw, you know, you can use your wallet to deflect the blows. Given how advanced we're making all of our things these days, it's a bit strange how little wallet-making technology has progressed over the years. We've got phones that can do crazy things, but wallets are still leather and heavy and too big for our pockets. Luckily, Ridge is here to help out with their sturdy wallets that can hold up to 12 cards with extra room for cash, and with more than 30 colours and styles to choose from, you're very likely to find something that suits your tastes. Plus, Ridge were kind enough to send me one of their waterproof commuter backpacks with a shock-resistant laptop holder and an external USB port for on-the-go charging. Honestly, once I start going on public transport again, I'm definitely using this as much as possible. Ridge comes with a lifetime warranty, so you can buy one wallet for the rest of your life if you like, with a 45-day return window for a free refund if you're not such a fan. Get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. It's time to move your wallet into the future. Alrighty then, I guess it's time to get scary. The scariest boss designs tend to be among the most creative around. I suppose that's somewhat of a given, since in order to explore and exploit someone's darkest fears, you tend to unearth a whole new perspective on character design that directly tugs at some pretty unnerving threads. Castlevania is far from a horror franchise, since it's definitely more focused on platforming and whipping bad guys than any kind of spookiness, but there's a lot of gothic theming and allusions to classic movie monsters like Dracula, so there's at least a very thin layer of creepy happening on the surface. This is some time before they started compressing a bunch of dead guys into a ball and calling it a boss fight, and yeah, I can see how Legion would be enough of a challenge to be a boss, since 2 or 3 reanimated corpses at a time I can handle, but a whole army of them might just be too much. Legion is one of those bosses that isn't immediately terrifying, but becomes that way the more you think about what you're doing. He's been a part of various Castlevania games in the past, but his peak was also his introduction, since in Symphony of the Night he takes up an entire room, and enough damage to certain parts of it will see whole chunks of corpses come splintering off the central mass. Castlevania has had scarier moments, but there's something really off-putting about carving away at a giant ball made of dead people in a way that makes you wonder how all of this fits together and who's really in control of all this. Legion does have a core that technically controls all the corpses, but who's out here deciding to blanket themselves with the living undead? I suppose everyone needs a hobby. Taking all the games as an average, no non-horror game has had me dread an upcoming boss fight more than Dark Souls. There's some natural fluctuations, since Bloodborne is a more forgiving game, so the bosses aren't so bad, but their designs are often so weird and wild that they serve a different, creepier purpose. Dark Souls bosses strike fear into your heart because of how hard they are and how the series has developed a well-earned reputation for throwing tricky roadblocks at you with very little warning, and you'll always remember your first playthrough of your first Dark Souls game, since you never feel strong enough to relax. Every time you turn a corner, there's a chance you'll stumble across a tricky enemy or a powerful boss fight, and when the first game is hiding so much optional content, the story behind how you found the gaping dragon isn't likely to be the same as someone else's. I found him pretty scary, but you could work that one out for yourself. When From Software goes ham with boss designs and sets out to make something unique and disturbing, we're all completely fucked, because Dark Souls games, they have a lot of dragons in them, and you gotta really try hard to make something unique and interesting when it comes to making dragons. You know, for easier sleeping at night, I wish the gaping dragon was more boring. Really does push the boat out for what still counts as a dragon though. I know we have big cartoony dragonites and plenty of long boy nagas, but the gaping dragon is a bit different in just the worst possible way. It's hard to say that I felt fear during its intro, since I had that with every boss, but something special creeps down your spine when you see the gaping dragon arch itself back and reveal its horrifying mouth ribcage thing that makes it seem a lot less like a dragon and more like Guzzlord from Pokemon. Yeah, I know he's a dragon too, but come on. The fight isn't too bad, I suppose, since he doesn't have a lot of attacks that might worry you, but he does spend quite a lot of time exposing that nasty chest mouth thing, and yeah, I guess it's quite bad when he grabs you and gives you a quick chew. That's not ideal. There's been more threatening and dangerous Dark Souls bosses, but few have made me shrink so quickly upon seeing them. Gonna need a bigger sword and some kind of tasty snack. Scary boss fights coming out of nowhere are incredibly effective. Buying and playing a horror game is almost like a declaration that you're okay with being scared and messed around with, since that's the primary directive of every horror game, but that also gives the game away a little. Losing the element of surprise means that you have to work harder to scare people, and I think it's safe to say that Metal Gear Solid 3 definitely had something like that when the Sorrow came along. MGS3 is an M-rated game, so it tackles at least a few themes that may or may not get your skin crawling, but it doesn't go full-on horror masterclass until the Sorrow turns up and recontextualizes every enemy encounter you've had up until that point. This game is memorable for a lot of different reasons, but you're not likely to forget your first fight with the Sorrow in a hurry. I'm sure the game would want it to haunt you for days. Many games have tried and failed to make you feel any kind of significant guilt over killing random enemies, but MGS3 cuts through this perfectly by lining up all the bad guys you've killed up until this point as ghosts that stagger towards Snake as you wade along this very straight river. You never do any fighting with the Sorrow since he doesn't even have any health, but the whole experience of seeing just how many people you've killed en route to this moment is one that not many games can match for real horror. Sprinkle in a couple of jump scares and the fact that you have to revive yourself once you've run out of ghosts to escape this hellscape, and damn, this boss fight is out of place in a game about fighting superheroes in a Russian jungle. They found a way to make that feel even weirder. I know we haven't really tapped into them yet, but you can't forget about horror games when talking about scary boss fights, because there's usually some kind of big monster who scares and terrifies you every step of the way, but often they don't translate well when confined to a boss fight. If your monster becomes a bit of a joke when turned into a boss fight, you gotta try a lot harder. Horror games are maybe the only genre where you can get away with clunky controls. Wouldn't be scary if you could nail all the terrifying creatures with perfect headshots every time, so you need at least a little bit of pushback from the game in order to make life uncomfortable for you. This makes it very interesting when it comes to judging how scary the boss fights actually are in horror games, since they don't always translate well. What does work is Silent Hill 2 being this quiet, ominous journey around a creepy town, frequently interrupted by check-ins from everyone's favourite triangle-shaped villain, Pyramid Head. It doesn't take long after the first time you find him for Pyramid Head to etch himself as one of the all-time scariest monsters from any video game, and considering how much you struggle with regular enemies in this game, the prospect of eventually fighting this thing is terrifying to think about. Not that you have to wait long for that. Pyramid Head feels so much like an otherworldly force that it's a bit of a shock to have a fight with him so early in Silent Hill 2, but if anything, it helps to ground Triangle Boy as a threat that you will be dealing with at various points throughout the game. Mind you, it doesn't diminish him as a threat, since his massive knife does a load of damage and can reach most parts of the room if you aren't careful with where you're standing, and it's this display of power that goes a long way towards teaching you how to get the most out of Silent Hill 2's combat. Not every enemy will be Pyramid Head though, which makes this fight scary in an extra special way and raises the bar to a level that the game never really hits again outside of some harrowing cutscenes. Arguably, there could never be a gameplay encounter that matches up with how Pyramid Head acts in cutscenes, but I feel vulnerable and inadequate, and I feel like this works very well. Didn't even get a cupboard to hide in this time, and yet everything was fine. I love where Resident Evil is at the moment. The HD remakes are a mixed bag, with Resi 2 feeling like the best blend of styles, but the big success story is the direction that the main series has gone in. I know a lot of people don't like the shift to a first-person perspective and likely won't give Resident Evil 8 much of a chance whenever that game comes out because of it, but I really enjoyed what Resi 7 brought to the table as a very competent combination of traditional Resident Evil puzzle solving and newer first-person horror tropes. Seeing through the eyes of the protagonist makes a lot of the scares hit much harder than if you were peering over his shoulder, and while I briefly considered Jack Baker for this video and his refusal to die, even after his torso explodes from too much chainsaw, his wife Marguerite speaks to me on a whole different, way scarier level. It's the insects, it's basically always going to be insects with me. Why does she birth insects? I suppose she's worth some points of creativity because I haven't played too many games where there's a woman hanging off the ceiling with an abdomen swollen full of insects, but I guess that creative bit of design helps to give her a natural looking video game weak spot, so 2 birds with 1 stone. Whereas Jack starts to teeter off into the realms of unstoppable force like Mr. X and Nemesis before him, you don't spend all that long with Marguerite at all, but honestly you don't need that long to get the gist of what she's all about and why she's so terrifying. And not just because of the jump scares. The bugs don't help, but I think it's because of how brief the encounter is relative to Jack. She's got her own wing of the house and doesn't hang around for too long before a boss fight, but once you get there, she's launching all sorts of insects at you, hanging off the ceiling, using her stretch Armstrong limbs, and I don't like it! She won't drive a car into you, but she does spend more than the usual amount of time crawling around like a creepy weirdo. Body horror is not my preferred poison. I remember when The Evil Within was a bit of a joke. It was billed as a great new horror franchise from the mind of Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami, but I think there was too much focus on making horror instead of helping its absolute armpit of a story. It's a tad awkward to play because the horror elements are there, and it is often a very scary game to play, but horror does rely on context quite a lot of the time. If you can't give the scares a reason to be there, then you're going to have a hard time convincing anyone that they should be scared of the horrendous thing lurching towards you. Although, sometimes a scary enough creature can speak for themselves, and when the Evil Within starts throwing scary lore at you, yeah, that'll do it. Context, though? Yeah, sure, she's a monster born after a girl called Laura died after suffering from injuries sustained in a fire, and so now she's this demon with too many arms who chases you on numerous occasions and eventually stops for long enough for you to fight her. I don't really like the boss fight, though, since you die too cheaply for it to feel like anything other than frustrating and annoying, and besides, those chase sequences are kind of like a boss fight. You're just moving somewhere while you're fighting her. She's goddamn terrifying in these moments, limbs flailing everywhere as she desperately attempts to catch up to you and tear something off. Bullets don't do much to stop her, but fire does, funnily enough, so at least you got something in your arsenal to keep Laura at bay. Otherwise, these chase sequences would be the worst thing ever instead of some damn effective horror. Just wish the game was more of this. Chase sequences are weird to classify within the realm of boss fights, because a lot of them have you just passively run away from some terrifying thing, but with Laura and a few others, you actually stand your ground and fight back against this monster. You can shoot it in the face, and in this way, you're not just being a defenseless scream queen, you're actively participating in the chase sequence. And you know, I like that. I feel a lot less useless. It's a nice escapist fantasy that way. What do you know about Echo the Dolphin? Fun dolphin swimming game, lots of ocean, kinda looks kinda pretty. Wrong! Because you don't need to play much of this before you realize how fucking ruthless this game is at every possible second. Betraying the initial impression that you're just a happy little dolphin enjoying your time under the sea because Sega were doing some seriously weird shit in the 90s. Put some damn clothes on your hedgehog, come on now! Echo is a mere vessel for an insane story of time traveling and alien invasions, and the overwhelming sense that this cutesy dolphin game isn't interested in keeping up this facade for long. It was only ever going to end one way, and when you've spent the whole game fighting alien drones, basic logic dictates that the final boss will be the head of the alien invasion, some kind of terrifying alien queen. Or how about just her giant head? You can't say you never saw it coming, but I still think that Sega could have done more to make the Vortex Queen a little less traumatizing if they really wanted to. They had to know that kids would play this game off of the back of their parents or grandparents thinking that this was some kind of innocent, aquatic adventure, and then wham! Giant alien head as a final boss. Hope you have fun! I don't know if Echo the Dolphin needs something like this, but to be fair, it does a good job of representing the size of the force you're coming up against, while also making it pretty fucking transparent how terrifying the Alien Queen is. I can't imagine Echo ending in any other way after the kind of game you've endured, full of hardships and crazy imagery. You'd think we would have learned our lessons of judging an innocent looking game from Kirby. At least there weren't any xenomorphs. I would love to know who decided to make Zelda games so surprisingly creepy. Is this you, Aonuma, or did Miyamoto find some scary things inside those caves he explored as a child? I mean, there would probably be spiders, so that would explain Twilight Princess Armagoma, and maybe Shiggy found a strange man who sells masks to kids. But everything else? Yeah, I'm not so sure. And while abstract fears like the moon destroying the world and the corrupting influence of power would have some kind of explanation through life experience, I really have no idea how Dead Hand came to be. I know everyone said it at this point, and you know, me saying it now doesn't really add anything, but Ocarina of Time really does push the limit of its E for everyone rating, and Dead Hand tips the balance towards T for teen and beyond. He turns up at a point in the game where the scary stuff starts to creep in, courtesy of the Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well. But it's a hell of a jump from creepy ambience to grey zombie with a very large jaw. He's very hungry, hope you're prepared. Maybe we just don't do this and move on. Bizarre to think that I played and beat this game as a kid, and yet I was completely unmoved by Dead Hand. Not so much nowadays, because I'm able to take in the little details, like the way he shuffles over to you once you've been grabbed by his hands, that have very long red fingernails, and how his body twitches when he dies, and I have no idea how this thing ended up in a Zelda game, and with all these details working directly against the tone of every other location and moment in the game. It's the horror that doesn't make sense that rings loudest of all, and there had to be a moment during development where someone decided to put in a disproportioned zombie in a game for kids, but surely there isn't an explanation that makes any sense. Did someone on the dev team have a literal nightmare and put in what they saw? Or did we just try way too hard to create some kind of ultimate zombie? Congratulations, you definitely did something. Did you really have to, though? I've been around for long enough and played so many scary games that I'm convinced that nothing can faze me anymore. We have so many horror tropes that have been repeated time and time again that there's not a lot a game can throw at me that can catch me off guard. You could easily go back through this video and make some of these bosses less scary by categorizing them as something we already know of. Like how Vortex Queen is an alien and the trio of horror monsters are humans having very bad days. But suddenly, you get far enough in Undertale and Toby Fox starts tapping into the deepest depths of his psyche and unearthing something that still doesn't make a lot of sense to me a good 5 years after I first saw it. Undertale is a game that has rules and only chooses to break them under very special circumstances, and when you take on the final boss of the neutral run and Flower becomes this weird fucking thorny TV thing with eyes in all the wrong places, you know, what do you want me to do? What the hell happened to this game? Undertale was no stranger to bizarre moments that defy the kind of game it appears to be from the outset, but Omega Flowey is a whole new level of crazy that the game itself can't handle very well, because battle mechanics that you've grown used to are now obsolete. Not that it would be worth trying to convince Omega Flowey to stand down the pacifist way, but I think it says a lot when you can't die in this fight. Makes it feel more like an event where you spend a good 10 to 15 minutes grappling with and taking in the monstrosity in front of you. If you want to get technical, then what is officially known as Photoshop Flowey makes a decent amount of sense, since Flowey absorbs a bunch of human souls and transfers the power into this random assortment of crap, so it does make sense, sort of. But then again, Omega Flowey looks unlike any enemy in the game and is deliberately intended as an almighty oh shit moment, so quite the scary boss fight. I remember when this game still seemed like a normal RPG. Didn't last long though. I wasn't kidding when I said that abstract horror is often the scariest type of horror. Sometimes reality offers up something even more terrifying that hits close to home, but abstract horror feeds back into the fear of the unknown by making it difficult to determine what exactly is scaring you right now. You're scared, you just don't really know why. Undertale is actually a really good fit for this, since it's a game that breaks a lot of conventions from RPGs and video games in general, so if there's any game that can almost get away with it, it would be Earthbound, actually. I suppose that makes sense, since Undertale was heavily influenced by the quirkier side of Earthbound, and you're rarely likely to find a more unusual final boss in the entire history of video games. Although I say unusual, but we all know what word would best suit talking about Gygas. May or may not require a change of underwear along the way, though. Earthbound is the story of Shigesato Itoi's childhood, with a sprinkle of added fantasy to make it more appealing, and while plenty of moments are full of whimsy and childlike wonderment, Gygas is where that innocence is smashed to pieces. The apparently true story goes that Itoi walked into the wrong movie and thought he saw a rape scene, and so Gygas was born out of a distorted breakdown of Itoi's innocence, with references to that scene in particular with the outline of a fetus in Gygas' third form, but every part of this battle is so obscured and impossible to comprehend that this lack of explanation or tangible threat ties in pretty perfectly to a feeling of helplessness and total confusion. The classic "you cannot grasp the true form of Gygas' attack" is lots of fun to read, but represents the absolute anarchy that is this boss fight, and can be easily extended to match a good 90% of what happens. You could write a 10-page essay on all this symbolism, and that just makes it more horrifying. It's too well thought out. This is RabbidLuigi, and I know I've been praising the strengths of abstract horror a lot, but things definitely get creepier when you relay them back to reality. Gygas is terrifying because you're not entirely sure what's going on and why you're there and how this relates back to the game you've been playing for so long, but it becomes more terrifying when you understand the symbolic significance of Itoi's childhood being shattered in front of him. You know, it's a boss that is terrifying on its own, but becomes more terrifying when you understand everything around it. Just try not to think too hard about it.